Welcome to the Verdin Verdict Sports Show. I'm your host, Jacob Verdin. Hope you're having a good Monday. Look, it's about as good of a Monday as you can have. Saints won. They tried to steer your emotions the right way after LSU's collapse. But at the end of the day, I feel like you're not losing too much. You're not in a situation where you're heartbroken. LSU's playoff chances were getting pretty slim to none. I feel like it's something we had to accept sooner rather than later, so we might as well start today. Brian Kelly met with the media. He tried to keep things, about as positive could be. We did learn some interesting information. Got our SEC grades as we give every Monday. We'll project the SEC championship. We got on our Reddit thread once again. Now that LSU's out the rat race, we were interested to see if we could figure out who might be the final two teams competing for the best conference championship in college football. We might have a little bit of a hunch. AP poll reaction, and we'll talk a little Saints versus Browns. Just a little, draft stock update because it's changing by the week. And I mean, look, you could celebrate a Saints win or you could be upset because the Saints are potentially fumbling a top 5. I don't know. Maybe even a top 10 pick. They might slide smooth out of that range if they keep this up. But without further ado, the injury report. We didn't get any word about a Garrett Nussmeier injury or anything of that nature. We did hear about Miles Frazier. He's going to practice. Garrett Dellinger's getting closer to returning. They're trying to wait till about, midweek, get him a couple of days under his belt. I'd say about Thursday, the official word on Dellinger, but quite frankly, wouldn't be surprised for it to be a game-time decision for when Vanderbilt rolls into town. They asked him about Diego Pavia, and it'll be a tough test, right? Mobile quarterbacks, LSU hadn't really been pairing well lately. I mean, it's been kind of a Achilles heel, if you will. So hopefully they're able to address it. I'd expect to be in for a long haul here on this one. Vandy's a pretty decent team. Most of their wins coming by less than a touchdown, keeping it one possession, keeping it within 3 points to Texas, who's probably going to punch their ticket to Atlanta. I mean, you got to give the Commodores credit where credit's due. Beat Alabama, who beat the brakes off of us. I mean, there's a lot of things here that are going to play into Vandy's advantage, potentially. Also, the fact that you're in Tiger Stadium. I think teams play up to LSU just because it's an exciting moment. It's an exciting environment. And, LSU fans, LSU players, eventually they get used to it. It's still cool. It's still exciting. But imagine going in it for the first time, playing your first game or, what have you. I think that's going to have a pretty interesting impact this Saturday. Coach Kelly was talking about the team, their mindset, their belief. He's saying they believe they can still get the job done. Obviously, not going to have an opportunity to do that this year. I guess he's talking about in the future. He made a reference to how, there's a few games where you lost and you had an opportunity in the fourth quarter to somehow steer it in, your favor. Obviously not the Alabama game, but 3 of your other losses. And look, I see where he's coming from, and there's, obviously some truth to that. However, 2 things can be true, that there's also a few other games where things don't go your way. If the luck doesn't fall on LSU's side, then you do add 2 more losses. And I mean, adding 2 more losses at this point would be the difference between 6-4 and 4-6. So we really don't want to have that conversation. But like the South Carolina and Ole Miss game, I mean, those are games where you were not playing the best football. You got lucky and you sneaked out of there. So at the same time as, you could have won some, you also could have lost some. And that's kind of my big takeaway from that. Deshaun Womack will be available to play this week. He was a part of the trio of defensive players that had a little bit of repercussions. Obviously, Sage Ryan and Swinson didn't play the first quarter versus Florida, and Womack did not travel with the team, but he will be eligible for this Saturday. Let's talk about the offense a little bit. Let's talk about the play calling, the headsets, the communication. It's been a little bit of a narrative through LSU, and Brian Kelly's been talking about, it's too much information, confusing. Is it doing, a disservice to the team? Is it creating just too many narratives going on and giving, Nussmeier and others too much to think about? He said Joe Sloan's still calling the majority of the plays. Kelly is involved in, the vetoing aspect of it. If it's a go or not, he obviously has the ability to pull the play. He said it's not particularly a long conversation, and he doesn't really want to, give Garrett Nussmeier so many options, so many decisions where he can't just, have a focus. He's kind of just getting pulled in so many different directions. And then let's talk about the Whit Weeks comment after the game, right? Talking about half the team running one play, half the team running another. It's a similar situation. Coach Kelly was talking about the mixed calls and the signals. He said it needs to be one voice. Now, this is where I was getting a little bit confused as well, because if on the offense you've got the trio, and obviously Brian Kelly said he doesn't want to veto plays often. He doesn't want to step in. But that one line of communication between Joe Sloan and Nussmeier could potentially be interrupted. And then here on the defense, we're talking about needing one voice to prevent the mixed calls, the mixed signals. Now, it's obviously two different sides of the ball, but, here's all I'm going to say. The communication, the headsets, and the call to player advancement that was made in college football this year, it hasn't gone as smoothly as a lot of people expected. I would have guessed, you just get more information, you're able to see the field clearer, and you can communicate like a professional. And it might help translate for rookie quarterbacks and just other skilled players to kind of hit the ground running faster in the NFL. But, I mean, obviously it's going to take some time to get used to it. It's going to take some time to kind of, integrate this into the college game. All in all, though, Brian Kelly's got an interesting point. The over-communication, the over-analyzing, it could do you a disservice, and it could be a sort of an explanation as to why the offense has kind of just halted to a stop over the last few weeks. We talked transfer portal a little bit. Obviously, his feelings on the transfer portal have not changed. Doesn't want to build from it. Wants to build through young players. Emphasize that's why we've got young players playing as of right now. You're trying to develop them, see what they're made of. Kind of get them ready to take that jump during the offseason, so you don't have to go get a player who's just going to come in 1 year, have to try to gel into the system. I mean, look, we've talked about the portal a lot on this show. You're rolling dice. You're flipping coins. Every now and then if you call heads, it might land and you might get lucky. But it's still a 50-50 shot. You got just as good of a chance as it not working out as it, working out. And with a younger player, investing the money into them and having them for a longer amount of time, a more guaranteed amount of, seasons or games, it's a lot easier to navigate and work the development of a player when they're a 4-year freshman to senior recruit, rather than coming in already having habits you have to break. They might not be able to translate into your, scheme or whatever the case may be in 1 year. And at that point, if you've already had, previous experience, if you've already wasted some eligibility, it's just not the same investment long term. So, I mean, look, I get it. I think LSU's in a spot where, look, you're going to have some glaring needs that you're going to have to touch with the portal, right? You're the quarterback, you're not going to need to. Halfback, not going to need to. I'd argue wide receiver, probably not going to need to. You're going to have to pull in some offensive linemen, some defensive tackles, probably, some secondary pieces. But besides the glaring needs that you desperately, have to address, I agree. I think the development and the slow rolling through, having younger cats just sit and grind like a Whit Weeks. Like, imagine the development he's going to see through next season as a 3-year player in this scheme. It's a lot more valuable, in my eyes at least, than a linebacker that you just plugged and played and pulled out of the portal. Let's move into our SEC grades. It was an interesting weekend, and I think, the path to the SEC championship, it was murky for the last 2 weeks. It's getting clearer. It's not set in stone. You got about 2 to 3, solid games that you're going to have to depend on. We'll give you our projected SEC title matchup at the end of the segment. But let's start it off. We'll go A, B, C, D, and we'll save the F for last, unfortunately. A, Florida. Might spoil the F. 27-16 win versus LSU. Big win at home. Like we said on our instant reaction Saturday, Napier bought time. Bought a lot of time. I mean, obviously Florida was supporting him going into the LSU game, and shout out to them for doing that, because if you put him in a situation where the pressure mounted and he thought, I'm playing for my job, the whole situation changes. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. However, the situation that happened, the situation that played out, Florida saying, this is our guy, he doesn't have anything to worry about, focus on your team and focus on Saturday, it panned out. Whether that's related or not, we'll never know, but it's an interesting look. Also, DJ Lagaway, solid QB for the future. Really impressed with what he brought to the table. I'm not going to compare him to someone like Lenoris Sellers, but look, the SEC has some younger quarterbacks that are going to be on the come up, and I think, for the next few years, you're going to be getting used to those names. Let's move on to the B, Georgia. 31-17 win versus Tennessee, but it wasn't just any win. It was a big game for Carson Beck, and he needed it, honestly. We've been talking about the turnovers. We've been talking about the offensive slump, quite frankly, for Kirby Smart and those Georgia Bulldogs. Well, guess what? 347 yards through the air for Carson Beck. 2 touchdowns, 0 picks. It's been a while since he's had a clean game, especially a clean primetime SEC big implication game. He got it done with no ETN. Obviously, Frazier got in, got about 68 yards, had some decent plays on the ground without their main guy. But Georgia, I think, has a shot. They control their destiny. If they win out, obviously they're going to get into that 12-man format. They're not going to get pushed out like they did when it was a 4-man. It's a good turnaround, though, because at first you were worried. You were wondering. I think the message that Nick Saban gave to Kirby Smart after Alabama beat Georgia, where sometimes you just need that kick in the rear end. Sometimes you just need that extra motivation from that loss. It could be playing out into fruition here. C, South Carolina, 34-30 win versus Mizzou. Now, hold up. Let's pump the brakes because it was a good ranked win for the Gamecocks, right? We needed the momentum, right? We predicted this in our top 3 game segment, but we did not predict this margin. It's a 4-point win. We thought it would be bigger. Why? 2 touchdowns in the final 1 minute and 30 seconds. So shout out to Mizzou. They finally, I'm not going to say playing to their expectations, but they had a decent game. And I know, the injury implications. I know all the setbacks that the Tigers have kind of underwent. But it was a pretty good game. South Carolina, nice comeback. You're building your momentum, and now you're looking like a potential favorite. Not this season, but next year, I think you could play yourself into the mix as a program that people are going to have to pay attention to. SEC is always going to have 5 to 7 big names that people are rumbling and throwing around in the offseason. I mean, you're a big conference, big names. But seriously, I think that South Carolina could push into the upper echelon. Might sound ridiculous, might sound crazy. But if I'm a recruit and I'm looking for somewhere to cut my teeth and I might not be the 5-star, the Bryce Underwood, the Harlem Berry, I think South Carolina, I think Vandy, I think those type of lower level, and they're not even lower, those mid-level SEC teams, they're pushing themselves up toward the pack. Who got the D this week for the SEC grades? Tennessee. You went up 10-0 on the Bulldogs. Lead dissolved. You're on the road in the SEC with a nice, hold on one of the best teams in recent memory, over the past half decade, at least for what it's worth. Tennessee had 2 touchdowns on the ground in the first half, could not get the pass going to save their life. I have a question that I'm going to pose for the potential Volunteer fans or just college football fans in general. Is Nico the guy for next year? Do you develop him? Do you hold him? And do you get him in this scheme to just keep growing? He's shown flashes. He has potential, obviously. But does Josh Heupel have a serious question on his hands where does he need to pull in a quarterback from a portal? Do they need to have some type of competition and just at least either A, give some motivation to Nico and try to push him into, his potential and get him, and maybe not necessarily more of a passer, maybe it's not his game, but they have to obviously figure something out because the lack of pass game, the lack of offensive production when Dylan Sampson can't carry you with 2 touchdowns and 150 yards, it's glaringly obvious, and I think, going into this offseason, there's going to be some questions and eyebrows raised. I'm raising them right now, could be wrong. React in the comments. F. For the second week in a row. Had to save this one for last. I couldn't rip open the segment with this, but LSU looked like the worst SEC team, in my opinion, for the last 2 weeks. They're in a rough spot. Yeah, they got injuries. They had suspensions, and they had a lot of confusion, apparently, with the headsets. They still have an opportunity to build toward next year. There's some bright spots. One of the biggest, look, the run game's picking up. He had 44 attempts. 130 yards wasn't your best game, but, you're averaging 25 to 28 carries. You almost doubled it, and now you're in a situation where that production is obviously going to increase. If you can pair that next year, a Caden Durham with a Harlem Berry, maybe a Caleb Jackson, if he somehow stays, it's an interesting path, right? You got a lot of moves that these SEC teams who are on the outside looking in at this playoff can make to somehow push themselves into that top 12 next year. It's not impossible. I mean, I'll give Coach Kelly some credit. Like he said, you do have a potential to be 9-1. There is a way where LSU can make some things shake, but there's also a way where they dip under 500 too. So I see both angles. Let's project the SEC title real quick. So got on our Reddit thread, our crazy rabbit hole, if you will, and we were looking through different matchups, just trying to find a way for madness to ensue, really. Try to find any type of way to see the standing shuffle, all kind of upsets. We were doing it all. We were doing, what if Bama loses in the Iron Bowl? What if LSU drops both? Does it affect anybody else's standings? And here's what we've learned. So the first thing, I don't really see a path to the SEC title for Ole Miss. I don't think they're going to be able to make it work. However, playoffs are still on the table. I will admit that. I think the team's pretty good. Voters are going to want to put them in. You got about 5 SEC teams in the top 12. We'll get to that in AP breakdown. I'm going to make sure on that one. But Another note, winner of the A&M game and the Texas game, that's pretty much going to determine their path. If A&M wins, I believe that they're going to slide in, probably play Alabama. And I think if Texas wins, more than likely it looks like Texas and Alabama. But Georgia does have an opportunity. I think if Bama loses, that's when Georgia slides in. But as of right now, Georgia has no SEC games left, so they're really at the whim of somebody else messing up and them getting in. But like we said, Bama, Georgia, Texas, and then Texas A&M are your contenders. I think the last two, UT and A&M, they're going to fight, try to somehow gain some contendership into the playoffs, but I think the loser's going to drop out. That's just my take. Real quick before we react to the AP poll, shout out Happy Dad. You know the drill. Gluten-free, no artificial flavors, low in sugar. You know where to get it. You're shopping at Rouse's, Albertsons, Walmart. Slide down to the liquor aisle, grab you a case, tell them the Verdin Verdict sent you. If you want the Happy Dad merch, we got a link in the description for you. You click the link, you go pick what you want. We got a code for you, Verdin15, 15% off at checkout. Once again, thank you to the team. Let's get into this AP poll breakdown. 4 of the top 5 teams in the country, as of right now, come from the Big Ten. So first things first, before we make any comments, before we make any more reactions, any more takes, we have to address the haters that talk about SEC bias, right? Everybody's talking about SEC teams getting favored. Everybody's talking about, it being unfair. And look, there are some odd pieces to this AP poll, right? Like Georgia being ahead of Ole Miss. It's an interesting look, right? They're only one spot ahead, and you can kind of have, 2 arguments for both sides. But one of the first takeaways I had to get out of the way was Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, and Indiana being the top 5. You got one SEC team sandwiched in the middle of 4 Big Ten teams. Now, will all 4 go? Probably not. I think they're in a similar boat to the SEC, but they'll probably see 3. Your conference champions are obviously going to get the auto bids. I think the runner-ups could slide in. And definitely in the SEC's case, one of those 2 lost teams are going to probably bite in and get to go. One of the teams that weren't dancing in Atlanta. They have 5 of them to choose from. We named you 4. Actually, I think you could have 6, really, because you got to throw in, I don't know, actually. I'm going to drop Tennessee out of this race with that Georgia loss. I was about to say you got to throw them in, but I'm backing out. I just don't see how you're going to vote that in after they lost to a team that might be dangling. So, yeah, no, you really got 5, adding Ole Miss to the 4 that we talked about. Ole Miss could potentially get voted in because A&M and Texas are going to drop an SEC game since they compete at the end of the year. Boise State, there's another interesting narrative going around, right? So we got 2 teams with 2 Heisman finalists, or potential finalists for that matter, who could punch their way into the college football playoffs. Now, I'm gonna pose the discussion. If Colorado's on the fringe, they're above Clemson, they're above South Carolina, they have a pretty decent shot at getting into the playoff if they even make the Big 12 championship. Obviously, if they win, you're going to have to punch them a ticket. But I think if they even make it, which they're looking like they're going to, being the second team, they could potentially make a college football playoff and give Travis Hunter one of the best arguments for a Heisman, right? I mean, you've got the attention, you've got the dual threat positions, you've got just about every story that you can utilize to campaign. However, in Ashton Genty's, to his defense, we've been talking all season about it being Boise State, who they're playing, it's Mountain West. The fact that they're the only Mountain West team ranked, the fact that Ashton Genty, and I'm not going to say he's the only person on the team because you've obviously got a lot of other great players, and you obviously have a lot of other playmakers that have impacted the game, but nobody other than Genty, nobody other than number 2, who at times has scored 3, 4, even damn near 5 touchdowns. I think this player is pretty much the only reason Boise State's in playoff contention, and if you get to see that blue field in the college football playoff and they take the 5th spot as the G5, seed outside the top 4 Power 4 conference bids, I think Genty has a pretty good shot at getting that award. The only thing holding him back was that he was on a team that was kind of, but with the 12-man playoff, what better way to just exemplify and show anybody has a shot. Anybody can get in. Just play well all season. Quite frankly, even the Oregon game, they played decent against the number 1 team in the country. It's an interesting storyline that I think, quite frankly, he might get the brunt end of, the crappy end of. He might get the end of it where he gets robbed of the Heisman just simply because of the storyline, because Travis Hunter's playing two positions. It's impressive. I just don't think, Travis Hunter's playing both positions well enough to detract attention from Boise State getting to a potential college football playoff. Genty pretty much carrying them to that spot. At first it looked like it wasn't going to be possible. At first it looked like Genty was just going to get screwed because Boise's small. I think if they're dancing in the top 12, you got to give them a shot. All right, real quick, before we hop out, let's talk Saints and Browns, right? Big win for Rizzy. They keep going. They keep adding days. They keep stacking them. Taysom Hill, 138 yards, 3 touchdowns. Hey, but Jameis popped out, though. Came back to the Superdome, 395 yards, 142 of them going to Jerry Jeudy. The Saints secondary, they're adjusting without Marshawn Lattimore, to say the least. They're going to have some growing pains for a little bit. But look, 2 wins since Dennis Allen is gone. I'm sure everybody's excited. I'm not going to try to damper the excitement, but I do want to point out, look, here's the draft pick stock, whatever you want to call it. Here's the update. You went from around pick 4, you win 1 game, you go to around pick 8, and then now you win this game, and you're about pick 10. So are the wins worth it? That's the question that I want to pose. Is, this feel-good, LSU's losing, the Saints are winning, we got something to be proud of. Is it worth the Saints potentially dropping in the draft? Now, if you're not going after a quarterback, well, they're probably not. I don't think you should. I don't think, Derek Carr is going to be leaving, especially with the money that they owe him, especially with the fact that they got someone like Spencer Rattler, and then the year prior they get Jake Heiner. I feel like the position that they're probably going to target, there's a chance it could be there, and they could have a decent prospect in the 10 to whatever, 15th pick range. So maybe tanking isn't a priority for New Orleans. But I did want to just kind of talk about the trend and how it's dropping a few picks a week. And if you win 2 to 3 more games, you might see yourself out of the top 15. It's worth noting, it's worth worrying about potentially. But, it's only because I think the Saints are on the cusp of a little bit of a rebuild. So, look, if you don't want the pick, at least you can utilize it as an asset and potentially trade it to somebody that does. We'll be live again Wednesday at 1 o'clock. Thanks to everybody that tuned in. Hit the like button on the way out. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss another live stream. This has been the Verdin Verdict, where we bring you sports talk on the go. Y'all have a good one.